All right, when you're looking to solve equations by factoring, it's basically just factoring. You're just going to have one more step at the end. Okay, so first thing you're going to have to do is set each equation equal to 0. That means you're going to have to move everything over to one side, and specifically I would move it over to the side that's going to keep that x squared term positive, because if you don't, you're going to have to factor out a -1 anyway, so don't do that. Then you're going to factor completely. You're going to set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So let's look at an example here. Step 1, move everything over to the same side of the equal sign. So I'm going to have to subtract the x to the other side and subtract the 30. That's going to give me x squared minus x minus 30 equals 0. That's what I want my equation to equal 0. When you're looking for your solution, you're looking for what terms of x are going to make this equal to 0. Okay? Step 2, factor completely. So I can go ahead and draw my two parentheses. Minus minus tells me that that's going to be a minus and a plus. My signs have to be different. The biggest number has to be minus. What multiplies to be 30 and subtracts to be 1? 6 and 5. Okay, so I'm looking for where this equals 0. Okay, this is the same thing as this, so I've just factored it. Okay, when you have two things multiplied together, how do you get 0? One of the things has to be 0. That's the only way that's going to happen. I can't do 2 times 3 or 2 times -3 or 2 times -2. That doesn't equal 0. The only way you're going to get 0 is if one of the terms is 0, and that's what's happening here is these two terms are multiplied together. So the way we find our solutions, we take each factor, sorry, I don't know why I wrote that way, equals 0 and set them equal to 0. So I'm going to set x minus 6 equal to 0. I'm going to set x plus 5 equal to 0. When I solve this, I'm going to get x equals 6 and x equals -5. Those are my two solutions. Okay. Question number 3. Step 1, move everything over to the same side of the equation. 3x squared minus 10x minus 8 equals 0. Also a good idea to put them in the correct order. Okay, so you want the x squared term, the x term, and then the number term. Okay, looking at factoring this, remember we're going to multiply. Since we have this leading coefficient of 3 and we can't do anything with it, we're going to multiply. So 3 times 8 is 24. So I'm looking for what multiplies to be 24 and subtracts to be 10. Okay, so we know that that's going to be a 12 and a 2. So let's go ahead and a -12 and a +2. Right? So let's go ahead and write our terms down. So 3x squared minus a 12x plus 2x minus 8. Okay. Remember, we factor this by grouping. I group that together. My greatest common factor between just those two terms is a 3x. When I factor that out, I'm left with an x minus 4. I group these two terms together. My greatest common factor there is a 2. When I factor that out, I'm left with an x minus 4. So these two terms go together to make one of my factors, x minus 4. The other two create my other factor, 3x plus 2. So I'm still looking for where this equals 0. Okay? Remember, to finish that, you set each factor equal to 0. So if I set x minus 4 equal to 0, okay? Pretty easy. I add 4 to the other side. I get x equals 4. Okay? 3x plus 2 equal to 0, okay? So I will tell you, you get in the habit, you're like, oh yeah, I can just change the sign, right? +6, -5, +4. That's true, basically, until you get something like this. Remember, when you solve this, you're going to have to subtract the 2 first. That gives me 3x equals a -2, which gives me x equals -2/3. So those are my solutions. X equals 4, x equals -2/3. Question number 3. Good news on this one, it's already set equal to 0, so I don't have to do anything there. All I have to do is factor this completely. How do you factor if there's just two terms? Okay, remember, step 1 factoring, every time is to check for a greatest common factor. And I have a greatest common factor of just x. If I take the x out, I'm left with an x minus 2. Okay. These are still my two factors. I have an x and I have an x minus 2. I'm going to set both of those equal to 0. So I set x equal to 0. I set x minus 2 equal to 0. What are your solutions? Well, good news here. This one's already set equal to 0. I add the 2 here. X equals 2. Those are my two solutions. X equals 0 and x equals 2. Last example. Again, step 1, you want to move everything over to the same side of the equation, and I still recommend move it to the side that's going to keep the x squared term positive. So in this case, I'm going to subtract this to this side and subtract this to this side. Okay, so my equation looks like this. 2x squared minus 8x minus 24 equals 0. Okay, what are you going to do first here? Multiply the 2 times the 24? Ooh, what is step 1 every single time? Greatest common factor. Do I have a greatest common factor? Yes, I do. 2. I can factor a 2 out of that whole equation. When I do that, I'm left with an x squared minus 4x minus 12. Okay. Good news is this can factor further. Minus minus is a minus plus. What multiplies to be 12 and subtracts to be 4? It's going to be a negative 6 and a positive 2. Greatest common factor stays in front. Again, now to find my solution, I set each factor equal to 0. So I'm going to set x minus 6 equal to 0. And I'm going to set x plus 2 equal to 0. Am I going to set 2 equal to 0? How do you set 2 equal to 0? There's not an x term there, so that's not going to help me find my solution. Now, if I had had to factor a 2x out of this equation, then I would need to set that term equal to 0 because it included an x value. X could be 0 there. 2 can never be 0, so it's not part of finding my solution. All I have to do is finish this. X equals 6 and x equals negative 2 are your solutions.